The tech conference hall buzzed with confidence. Rows of white folding chairs faced a wide stage lit by LED panels and oversized logos. Words like innovation, disruption, and future glowed on the screens in sharp fonts. People in hoodies and tailored blazers chatted easily, trading startup names and insider jokes as if they were currency. At the edge of the room sat Malik Johnson. He was 19, black, slim, wearing a second-hand jacket and sneakers that had clearly seen better days. His backpack rested between his feet, frayed at the seams, stuffed with a cheap laptop, notebooks, and printed resumes that no one had asked for. Malik attended a community college 30 minutes outside the city. No famous professors, no venture capital recruiters, just night classes, outdated computer labs, and long bus rides home. But he coded every day, before class, after work, late into the night, because code made sense in ways people rarely did. The panelists took the stage, 4 white engineers, all from top universities, all introduced with applause, impressive titles, and company names everyone recognized. They smiled comfortably, leaning back in their chairs like the future already belonged to them. The moderator opened the Q&A, hands shot up immediately. Questions about scaling, about AI ethics, about startup funding. The panelists answered smoothly, occasionally laughing at inside jokes that reinforced exactly who was meant to be in the room. Then Malik raised his hand. The moderator hesitated, just for a moment, before pointing at him. Yes, you. Malik stood, heart pounding, but voice steady. Hi, he said. I was looking at your demo earlier. The system crashes when concurrent requests exceed a certain threshold. Have you considered optimizing the queue handling or refactoring the memory allocation? The room went quiet. One panelist blinked. Another smiled. Then someone laughed. A soft chuckle at first, then louder. Where did you say you're studying? One of them asked. Community college, Malik replied. Another panelist leaned into his mic. That's ambitious feedback. More laughter rippled through the room. The moderator smiled awkwardly. Well, thank you for the question. Malik sat down slowly, heat rising in his face. Around him, people avoided eye contact. A few smirked. No one defended him. On stage, the panel moved on. They joked about real-world complexity, about how theory didn't always translate to practice, about how scaling systems wasn't something you learned in intro classes. Malik listened and memorized everything. That night, back in his small bedroom, Malik opened his laptop. The fan whirred loudly as it always did. He pulled up the open-source repository the panel's company had proudly shown earlier that day. He ran the code, and the system crashed, exactly where he said it would. Malik didn't feel angry, he felt focused. Line by line, he traced the issue. Memory leaks, poor thread handling, a fix that wasn't elegant, but was effective. By 3:17 a.m., the system ran clean under stress. Malik leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. He didn't smile. He committed the fix to a forked repository, documented everything clearly, and submitted a pull request. Polite, professional, impossible to ignore. Then he closed his laptop and went to sleep, unaware that by morning, the same people who laughed at him would be staring at their screens, trying to understand how a kid they dismissed had just solved a problem their team hadn't. And, for the first time, the system they built would be forced to listen, not to a title, not to a resume, but to code that worked. The pull request sat unnoticed for almost 6 hours. Inside the company's open plan office, engineers arrived with coffee in hand, glancing at dashboards that had been blinking red on and off for weeks. The system demoed so confidently at the conference had been unstable long before Malik ever asked his question. Crashes under load, unexplained slowdowns, customer complaints quietly pushed into backlog tickets labeled low priority. At 9:12 a.m., an automated alert pinged the team's internal channel. New external pull request submitted. A junior engineer clicked it out of habit. 5 minutes later, his chair scraped loudly against the floor. Guys, he said. A few heads turned. This PR, he continued, scrolling. It fixes the concurrency issue. Cleanly. Someone laughed. From who? The engineer swallowed. Some kid. Community college email. The laughter died quickly. They ran the tests. The system didn't crash. They ran stress simulations that had previously taken it down in minutes. Still stable. A senior engineer leaned closer to the screen, jaw tightening. That's not supposed to work. But it did. By mid-morning, the pull request had been escalated to the same panelists who had laughed the day before. One of them recognized the username instantly. Wait, he said slowly. That's the kid from the Q&A. Silence filled the room. Another panelist scrolled through Malik's commit history. This isn't luck. He understood the architecture. A third crossed his arms. How did we miss this? No one answered. Across town, Malik Johnson sat in his community college computer lab, headphones on, refactoring a personal project between classes. He didn't refresh his email. He didn't check GitHub notifications obsessively. He had learned early that hope was expensive. At 11:47 a.m., his phone buzzed anyway. Pull request accepted, then another notification. Comment from maintainer. Malik opened it slowly. This is a solid fix. Can we talk? He stared at the screen for a long moment. Not because he felt vindicated, but because this was the moment he had been preparing for, the one where the work spoke louder than the assumptions. Back at the company, a meeting was hastily scheduled. We need to invite him in, one executive said. We need to be careful, another replied. This looks bad. It looks worse if we ignore it, someone else added. The room fell quiet. They all remembered the laughter. They all remembered the question they hadn't taken seriously. That afternoon, Malik walked out of his class and sat on the steps outside the building, sunlight warming his face. He finally opened his inbox. 3 emails. One from the open source maintainer, one from a recruiter who had noticed the merged fix, one from the company whose panel had dismissed him. The subject line of the last one read, "Following up on your insightful feedback, Malik exhaled slowly. He didn't feel angry. He didn't feel proud. He felt steady. Because the system that laughed at him yesterday was now running on his solution. Quietly, efficiently, without ever asking where he went to school. And that was only the beginning. The meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. Not a casual call, not a quick chat, a formal invitation. Malik Johnson sat at his kitchen table staring at the email on his cracked phone screen. The address alone carried weight. The company whose panel had laughed at him, whose logo still hung in banners at the conference center downtown. They wanted him to come in. Not as an audience member, not as a student. As the person who fixed their system. Malik borrowed a button-down shirt from his cousin. It was a little big in the shoulders, but clean. He took the bus into the city, the same route he rode every day to community college, passing glass buildings he had only ever seen from the outside. Inside the company lobby, everything felt expensive and quiet. White walls, polished floors, people walking fast with laptops tucked under their arms. Malik checked in with reception, his voice calm even though his pulse wasn't. "They're expecting you," the receptionist said, surprised. The conference room was larger than the stage where the panel had laughed. Same faces, though. The 4 white engineers sat around a long table, laptops open, posture different now, less relaxed, more guarded. The moderator from the panel stood near the window, arms folded. Malik took the empty chair at the end of the table. For a moment, no one spoke. Then one of the panelists cleared his throat. "Malik, thank you for coming in." Malik nodded. "You wanted to discuss the fix?" Another engineer leaned forward. "We ran your patch in production. It reduced crash rates by 80%. 80%. They said it like a confession. Malik listened quietly. You identified a flaw our team missed, the first panelist continued. That doesn't happen often. Malik met his eyes. It happens when people don't listen. The sentence landed without aggression, but it hit harder than anger would have. No one laughed this time. They pulled the code up on the screen. Malik walked them through his reasoning step by step. Memory allocation, thread safety, why their assumptions broke under real-world load. He didn't rush. He didn't show off. He explained it the way he had taught himself, carefully, clearly, without wasting words. Halfway through, one of the engineers shook his head slowly. "You know," he said, "we assumed this problem was too complex." Malik replied, "It wasn't complex, it was ignored." Silence again. At the end of the meeting, an executive who hadn't spoken yet finally did. "We'd like to offer you a paid internship," he said, "with the possibility of full-time employment." Malik didn't answer immediately. "I go to community college," he said calmly. "I work nights. I don't have time for unpaid opportunities." The executive nodded quickly. "This would be paid. Competitive." Malik leaned back slightly. "I'll think about it," he said. That surprised them more than the code had. Outside, back on the sidewalk, Malik stood for a moment, looking up at the building. People passed him without noticing, unaware that the systems they relied on now ran more smoothly because of something he had written in a small bedroom after midnight. Later that day, Malik returned to his college lab and sat at the same computer he always used. The keyboard stuck on certain keys. The monitor flickered. Nothing had changed there, but everything had changed inside him. He didn't need their laughter to turn into applause. He didn't need permission to belong. The system had already accepted his work, and from now on, every room that doubted him would have to answer the same question. Not where did you study, but how did you see what we missed? Because the kid from community college was no longer asking for a seat at the table. He was rewriting how the table worked. Malik Johnson didn't accept the offer right away. He went back to his routine instead. Classes in the morning, work in the evening, code at night. The emails kept coming, not just from that company, but from others who had traced the fix back to him. Some praised his insight, some asked where he had learned to think like that. A few offered opportunities that sounded impressive but felt hollow, wrapped in language about exposure and potential. Malik read them carefully. Then he waited. 2 weeks later, the same tech company released a public update. No press conference, no dramatic announcement, just a line in the changelog. Resolved critical concurrency issue. Thanks to community contributor M. Johnson. Developers noticed. They always did. On forums and comment threads, people began asking questions. Who was M. Johnson? Where had he come from? Why had it taken an external contributor to solve something the company had struggled with for months? The discussion wasn't angry, it was curious. Inside the company, something shifted. Code reviews slowed down, not because people were less productive, but because they were more careful. Junior engineers were asked to speak first in meetings. Assumptions were questioned. Titles lost some of their weight. The panelists remembered the room where they had laughed. They didn't joke about ambitious feedback anymore. One afternoon, Malik received a final email from the company. Short, direct. We'd like to offer you a full-time role on the systems team. Flexible schedule, tuition support, remote options. Malik stared at the message for a long time. Then he replied, "I'll accept, on one condition." They agreed without arguing. Months later, Malik walked into that same conference hall, not as a guest, not as a student, but as a speaker. The banners were the same, the buzz familiar, but when Malik took the stage, the room grew quiet in a way it hadn't before. He didn't talk about success stories. He didn't talk about proving people wrong. He talked about listening. Good systems fail when we assume who has insight, he said. The bug wasn't hidden, it was dismissed. People took notes. Some shifted uncomfortably, most listened. At the back of the room sat students from community colleges, trade schools, online programs, kids who looked like Malik once had, clutching backpacks and questions they weren't sure they were allowed to ask. Malik saw them, and when the talk ended, he stayed. He answered every question. He read every pull request they sent him later, not because he was generous, because he remembered. That night, Malik returned to his small bedroom, opened his laptop, and continued working, the same way he always had. The code was harder now, the systems larger, the stakes higher, but the principle hadn't changed. Good code didn't care where you came from. Working Solutions didn't laugh. The tech panel that once dismissed him had learned something far more valuable than a fix. They had learned that intelligence doesn't announce itself with credentials. Sometimes it raises its hand quietly and waits to be taken seriously. And if it isn't, it finds another way to be heard.